Slow today. I don't know if everyone's still hung over from New Year's or what, but I know Sharon's depressed because of Michigan. So I don't know what the rest of your excuses are, but yeah, if you can please rise and we will get things started. And if you could please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could ask you to remain standing, I think, Bobby D, will you recite our invocation today, please?
So I found a little something from the National Park Service that I thought I'd read today called The Promise of America.
It's a little dim.
The exact promise of America is something that each American defines for themselves. While our nation is richly diverse in countless ways, there is a common thread, an aspiration to create something greater for ourselves and each other. As a new nation was formed in 1776, it was grounded on ideals such as freedom, liberty, equality, and the encouragement to speak up for individual rights. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," from the Declaration of Independence. Many were left out of that vision at the time and in the centuries that followed, but the revolutionary spirit of the founding ideals has beckoned generations of Americans who fought to ensure that we are all included in its promise. And they go on to say that this month, join us as we explore founding ideals of our democracy and how generations of Americans have endeavored to shape our nation around the promise, the aspirational spirit of those concepts. There are more than 400 national parks stretching from Maine to Guam, and the National Park Service community-based programs and partnerships reach communities everywhere in between. Find stories that explore the promise of America through conversations about identity, heritage, perspectives, and different ways to fight for that promise to be achieved by all Americans. So please explore our national parks.
Great, Bob. Thank you. All right, so go ahead and have a seat, and we'll get things started here. First, we want to start off and see if we have any visiting Rotarians or guests. I think I know Mike's here today, but don't see anyone else. Anyone on Zoom that would like to introduce themselves as a visiting Rotarian or guest? No. And I think, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we're able to. Jeff, you want to say hello really quick? I don't know if you can.
Yes, I unmuted
Oh, there you
myself. Go. I don't know if other people can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm honored to have been invited and happy to join.
No, great. Well, thanks for joining us. Looks like there's a few folks on Zoom, and I guess I should start things off by a little bit of an apology on behalf of the hackers, I guess. So we had a little bit of an incident a little bit ago on Zoom. So my apologies to everyone there. Thankfully, our team was right on it. Under Bob's vigilant eye, he caught it all, and we had to log everyone off. So we'll have some updates going forward on probably a little bit better protocols for logging in here starting next week. So stay tuned for that.
You gotta give Arturo credit.
Arturo, you he was able to see that right away. All right. Okay, so then get to a few announcements. Today is the first meeting of the month. We normally have our canned drive for Internet Club. So Pat, you're going to be able to take them? Okay, great. So if you have any cans, Pat will be around afterwards. Okay, great. All right, good. Well, I think February, it might be our last month of doing that. So please collect as many as you can. Hopefully we can have some success at the rodeo in collecting some more. But anyway, yeah. So Barbara is out of town for this month. So we'll try to get an update from her at some point on how we're doing. Let me see. Arturo, would you mind giving us an update on the rodeo?
So yes, earlier this week, we're at about 40% sign up. I did share, I don't know if you can see this. Well, I put on your seat a little flyer here. It gives you either a QR code or a link to sign up for the beer sales. So, and Steve, I think you can pass it along, or it's in the wagon wheel as well. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you, Arturo, for putting that together. And Irv, thank you for your efforts in organizing everything. Anything else that you'd like to add? You're still muted there. There you are.
Yeah, I just would appreciate everybody who's going to be signing up to do it as soon as possible so we can find out if we're going to need some additional help. I was hoping we'd be closer to 60 or 65% by now.
Well, hopefully we get some renewed spirits here with the new year, resolution time and all that. So yeah, hopefully we can make some progress there. And yeah,
Jimmy, one other
and just
Jimmy,
a reminder. Yep.
One other thing, if there is anybody who can sign up to just be an extra person, Bob Grady did that for 3 days. That's very helpful because if I got the ability to have that extra person, they don't necessarily have to be there at 10 o'clock. They can come an hour or two later and fill in where we need help. So if there's anybody in that situation, just have them give me a call or send me an email.
Okay, great. And the link is been put into the chat there below. So feel free to check in and see what's available. And hopefully you can make yourself available and help us in our endeavors to raise some funds. So thank you for that. Sharon, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We had a bit of a success story with the Rotary Vocations. So I don't know if you wouldn't mind just a quick update on that.
All right. I think most of you are familiar with the Rotary Vocational Fund of Arizona. And President Jimmy asked me end of summer if we could assess a student who was applying at Pima College in nursing. And so because of COVID and all the scheduling conflicts, we did it by phone. And she proved to be an outstanding student, someone who has wanted to be a nurse for a long time. She's a little older, closer to 30, and always had the goal of becoming a nurse and didn't think she could afford school. So she was accepted in all areas. And then over the winter holiday, I got another email from President Jimmy and the state organization asking if we would be willing to sponsor a young lady who is in her last semester of dental hygiene at Pima. And we pretty much did the same process, and Gabrielle was accepted. The goal is to bring both of these outstanding people into a meeting, or at least a Zoom meeting, once they know what their classes are like, because sometimes Fridays are pretty heavy scheduled for them. But I'll do my darndest to get them here so we can meet them and support them, because that's a wonderful role vocationally for us to do as Rotarians. Thanks.
That is really cool, and do get some emails, and just the applicants are just really appreciative of all that. I think it was $1,400 and $2,000, I think. So pretty good chunks of money that were handed out through that fund. So just a reminder there too. That's another, as tax season approaches, that's another opportunity to take advantage of your tax strategies and all that. So the Rotary Vocational Fund of Arizona is something there that is available to you for tax purposes, but the money actually goes to very good use and hopefully for future Rotarians as well. Let me see. Last announcement I have is we have a board meeting on the 11th. That's next Tuesday at 5:30 via Zoom. So for all those board members in attendance, if you can put that on your calendar, and the agendas and everything are starting to go out. So we'll get to that on Tuesday. Any other announcements? Yep, Bobby D.
There is a sign-up sheet on the table, and I encourage you on Zoom to, if you can participate, get in touch with us. But it's a work project 2 weeks from tomorrow on the 22nd, a Habitat for Humanity project. I don't have the exact location, but it's in the morning from like 8 a.m. to 12:30, something like that. So half a day, Saturday, the 22nd of January. And Andrew O'Sullivan is kind of coordinating it. But if you're available, we'd like to get about 15 people on our team. And it could be a friend who might join with you. It doesn't have to just be members. So just a reminder about that.
Thank you, Bobby D.
Oh, Bob, could I ask a quick question? Is there anything other than our bodies and hands that we need to bring, tools or anything? Okay, great.
Back braces.
Certainly for after.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Bobby D. And any other announcements? And if not, then I am going to ask you all to help me welcome Al Chesser, who will be introducing our speaker today. Al.
Oh, boy. I just want you to know I'm absolutely thrilled to see Sharon here today because she's been convalescing since the Michigan game. She managed to get herself upright and get here. It's been a thrill. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm neither a Michigan State fan nor an Ohio State fan, so I'm okay. I'm okay. Not last week, but a few weeks ago, you got an introduction of Mike Margolis. We were just sitting at the table there and worked out that we've known each other for over 60 years. So that was I was like 2, and he was older. But yeah, we were neighbors across the back wall for a long time, and high school classmates and everything else. And so I've known Mike for a long time, and I know the quality of the material that he brings to us and to others concerning the history of the World War II era. So he's going to pick up where he left off the last time and do part 2 of his World War II presentation. Mike, welcome back.
Well, again, I want to thank Al for inviting me and for you all putting up with me. And Maria, are you ready, dear? Are you ready? Okay, all right. Let's go to the presentation, folks. Put me on. As Al was saying, we're going to pick this up about where we left off. I've got a little fewer slides, and maybe we can do some questions this time. There's good news and bad news, by the way. The good news is I'm going to finish up this presentation. The bad news is I have a part 3 coming. All right, so here we go. Thank you. We ended with the liberation of Dachau by U.S. and Allied troops, mostly American troops, I should say. And part of that group included the 442nd Infantry Regiment. And this is a group I'm really fond of because I've got a friend whose father served in it. This is the most decorated unit in American history. I'll let you read that list on the left side, starting with 23 Congressional Medals of Honor awarded to just 3,000 men. By the time they had made it from the Italian campaign all the way to the Rhineland, they lost about half of their people. Amongst other things, they liberated or helped save the lives of the Texas National Guard unit from destruction. This is just one of many of the lost battalions of the war. And for that, they were all made honorary citizens of Texas, which I think is kind of neat. And that was by Governor John Conley. Now, attached to the 442nd was the 100th Infantry. This is a smaller outfit. This is made up of 100% second generation Japanese Americans. These are the fellas that were interned. These were all from this group of interned Americans, some 127,000 of them. And they also fought alongside the 442nd. They started in the Italian campaign. In the first 40 days of the Italian campaign, they sustained 510 Purple Hearts. Out of 1,400 men, they are known as the Purple Heart Battalion. So I wanted to talk about this just a little bit. This was FDR's Executive Order 9066, February 1942. This was an awful thing for the country to have done. I think we know much better now. There's a local tie here, and it's the Gordon Hayabayashi. If you've been to Mount Lemmon, you've probably seen a sign that says something about Gordon Hayabayashi Recreational Area. And Gordon was a young man. He was a senior at Washington State University in 1942, and he filed a lawsuit against the United States government for the fact that this whole internment issue was unconstitutional. Well, he lost his case, and I'm not sure why he lost the case, but it gives you an idea of the kind of challenges that he faced at that time. He turned himself into the FBI, and he was sent to Mount Lemmon. Mount Lemmon had a federal prison camp called an honor camp, and Gordon Hayabayashi was there on Mount Lemmon at that camp. So just to let you know that the government case against him was finally overthrown in 1987. What's that thing about justice delayed? Anyhow, I wanted to bring that up, and a bad chapter in history. The last 20 or 25 years, my wife and I have had the pleasure of escorting the Battle of the Bulge veterans in the Veterans Day Parade. There was a group in town. We started out with about 25 of these fellas. Mind you, they were all in their 70s, they were all in their 80s when we started. We're down to just one or two now, but a few of us, four of us, have been able to escort these guys in our Jeeps. And I want to talk a little bit about them. That's my wife and three of my grandchildren, by the way. This was the last, largest, and most desperate battle of the war. And essentially called it the Battle of the Bulge because the Germans broke through an 81-mile line, and it quickly became a bulge in our line. So that's why it's called the Battle of the Bulge. And all of this happens in Belgium. It happened at the worst time in history, the worst weather in 40 years. Sub-zero weather, sub-zero temperatures, snow, rain. We were unable to use air power at all. Patton's Third Army rose to about 500,000 men. By January, it is 705,000 men. We sustained about 89,000 casualties and 13,000 dead. This was one of the three bloodiest battles in American military history, the others being D-Day and Gettysburg. German army mounted 450,000 men, probably took 100,000 casualties, estimated 25,000 killed in action. The sign on the right is very interesting. This is a German SS unit, and you see the sign pointing to Malmedy, 13 kilometers. We'll talk about why that sign is important to us. At the earliest part of the battle, the 101st Airborne was surrounded at Bastogne. Bastogne was kind of a crossroads, very important in terms of transportation, so it had great strategic importance. So Patton and the Third Army raced towards Bastogne to save the 101st Airborne. It's about this time that Patton orders his Third Army chaplain O'Neill, to write a weather prayer. And I found out that all the veterans from the Battle of the Bulge carry this thing in their pocket. And it's interesting. It's very short. And it's Almighty and most gracious Father, we humbly beseech thee of thy great kindness to grant us, to restrain these immoderate rains for which we're having to withstand. Grant us fair weather for battle. And it goes on. And they all carry it with them because they say it works. And I'm sure it does. Well, in any event, the weather clears. We're able to use air power. We're able to save the lives of the 101st Airborne. At that location, the Germans came to the headquarters with the white flag, and General Anthony McAuliffe thought that they were going to surrender and supposedly said nuts to the Germans. And that's the way UPI carried it. The people that knew General McAuliffe knew he probably said something a lot more. And it might have started with the F word. For some time after this, he was commonly called General McNutt. Again, horrible conditions. Probably half our casualties come from the weather, frostbite mostly. I spoke to one of our veterans and I said, do you feel comfortable enough to talk about the war? And he said, well, Mike, he said, there wasn't much to talk about. He said, I got lost. I got captured by the Germans. He said, they held me for about a week, 2 weeks. And he said, after that, they just let me go. Well, he was one of the lucky ones. Because a lot of American boys were captured. And we had this massacre at Malmedy. 113 Allied prisoners and Belgian civilians were massacred by the Germans. That same SS unit you saw earlier. They were rounded up at the end of the war. They were tried. And because there were some snafus in the trial, most of them got out early. None of them were executed. But the leader of the group was brutally murdered some 30 years later in retribution. And there is a memorial where that massacre took place in Belgium. And every year on that date, Belgian citizens and U.S. Armed Service people remember. There is a memorial service there at that location. You can visit it if you go. The Germans tried everything in the Battle of the Bulge, and one of the things they tried was to dress Germans up in American uniforms and use American captured equipment to further exploit our lines. And none of that worked. They were all caught, they were all tried as spies, and they were all shot. This is Dresden after the war, pretty much destroyed. Nuremberg, Berlin. After the Battle of the Bulge, American and Soviets meet at Torgau, about 85 miles from Berlin. The Soviets will go on to capture Berlin by themselves. This is a decision made by Eisenhower to save American lives. It was also discussed very briefly at the Yalta Conference. I talked about this conference earlier. The point of the Yalta Conference was to decide what would happen after the war. And the Allies, the French, the British, and the Dutch wanted everything to return to colonialism. They all wanted their land back, which did happen. They decided to divide Berlin into 4 sectors. You know, eventually the Berlin Wall was erected. And they decided to go ahead with war crimes. Stalin was very quiet about the whole thing. He talked about the Allies going back to pre-colonial or pre-war colonial times. What Hitler got out of it was all of Eastern Europe. I mean, think about that. Stalin. What Stalin got was all of Eastern Europe. And we really weren't on to him. I mean, he probably outsmarted us. Churchill will write in his memoirs that when he saw the condition that FDR was in, he was shocked. And he was near death, and he would die a couple of months later. He may not really have known what was going on. I've read a lot about what happened at Yalta. And interestingly enough, so FDR would die of a cerebral hemorrhage 2 months later. And 5 months after that, we would be able to detonate our first atomic bomb, Trinity. It's Trinity Boys Ranch, not too far from Los Alamos, New Mexico. Churchill didn't know anything about the bomb or the Manhattan Project. and neither did Vice President Harry Truman. But Stalin knew all about it because they had a spy working on the Manhattan Project, Klaus Fuchs. So Stalin knew more about what was going on than any of them. A lot of people will tell you that the Cold War, I actually believe the Cold War actually began at Yalta because we pretty much succeeded Eastern Europe to the Soviets. And whereas Stalin didn't really talk about how seriously or how much he wanted Berlin, he did. He had several motivations. These are Soviet troops in Berlin. The Soviets will endure over 100,000 casualties taking the city. And the reason the fighting is so bloody is that the Germans know that if the Soviets capture them, they will most likely be put to death. They'll lose their lives. And it could have been avoided in a respect that the Germans would have loved to surrender to the Americans because they know they would have lived through the war and all the fighting would be over. Completely different with regards to the Soviets. Stalin said he'd make the first Russian who would raise the flag of the hammer and sickle over the Reichstag, an eternal hero of the motherland. And so that flag raising you see over the Reichstag, that's important to them as our flag was at Iwo Jima. An iconic moment, you might say. This is Berlin on the ground. One of his objectives was to kill Hitler. And he didn't make it because Hitler and Eva Braun took their lives just hours before the Russians would have reached the bunker. It was Hitler's direction that his body, along with Eva Braun's, be burned. And the reason was because 2 days before, Mussolini and Clara Petacci had been captured by the partisans. And they were executed and they were hung and their bodies were badly mutilated. They were actually caught around Lake Como, making their way into Switzerland. The partisans captured them, shot them, brought them back to Milan. Their bodies were hung in a square at this location, the same place where the fascists had killed a bunch of partisans. The second target was the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Physics. And Albert Schweitzer had been the director from 1917 to about 1933 when the Racial Purity Acts come in. It's obvious there's no place for him in Germany, so he leaves, but he's the director. And they want to target the Institute because they want to take all of the research, they want to capture the scientists, and they want to take all of the equipment and all of the records back to Russia, which they do. They didn't find the uranium they were looking for because it had been moved elsewhere, but they got everything else. The other target was the Reichsbank. This is the state bank. They wanted to take all the gold and silver bullion, which they did. It would all come to an end May 8th. This would be VE Day, Victory in Europe. The war would come to an end September 2nd after we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If it was up to Patton, we would have started a war right then and there against the Russians. But it would not be. And Patton, of course, got his hand slapped again for saying things he shouldn't have said, but in reality, he knew exactly what was going on. He was one of the few people that would say it. That's Gorky Zhukov next to him, who is the hero of the Soviet Union. He's awarded the Eternal Hero of the Soviet Union, their highest award, 4 times. He's the one responsible for the defense of Stalingrad, Leningrad, Moscow, and the taking of Berlin. He's a very popular guy. Patton would be hurt in an automobile accident, a freak accident. He'd lie in traction 10 days before dying. His wife, Bea, would come to the United States and be at his side. As his dog, Willie, and all of his stuff getting ready to be shipped home. That was a UPI photo. Patton's buried here next to 5,500 others that were part of the Third Army. His grave was in the middle of everybody else's grave, but they finally had to move it to an area outside because all the other graves are being trampled. People were going to his gravesite. In fact, you see a lot of photographs with veterans of World War II being photographed right next to Patton's grave. The last operation of the war is Operation Magic Carpet. That's to bring everybody home as quickly as possible. We left all of our equipment there or it was destroyed. And most of that in Western Europe went to our allies. They'd be our NATO allies. That equipment would become theirs, or at least on loan. We learned a lot. We learned a lot from the war, and it changed the country in many good ways. We learned that women could do any job that men could do. The lady on the right is actually the inspiration for that poster. We can do it. She ran a lathe at an aircraft factory. She died in 2018. Naomi Parker Fraley is her name. We found out that women could fly planes as well as men. The lady on the very far left in the photograph is B.J. Erickson. B.J. flew 46 different kinds of aircraft. She was the first woman to fly a B-29 across the Atlantic. Her flight trainer was Paul Tibbets. Unfortunately, she's not with us any longer either. We learned that black men could fly planes as well as white men, and they earned their way. Benjamin Davis was the commanding general of the Tuskegee Airmen. He'd retired as a 3-star general of the United States Air Force. Remember that after World War II, the Army Air Corps becomes the Air Force. Benjamin Davis, 3-star general. Great group of guys. You had over 1,250 missions. All the men they flew with and protected on missions in Europe, remember these guys. They are well respected. We found out that black men could fight just as well as white men. They served their country just the way everybody else did. The same with black women. The group on the left sorted all the mail for Europe. Worked 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day, continuously, 900 women strong, all volunteers. The group on the bottom represents over 500 black nurses who served. They had to fight discrimination probably as much as anybody. You couldn't get into the nurse corps without being a member of the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross would not accept black women. Thank God all of this has changed. These people fought the war and they had to fight racism at the same time. George Marshall was probably one of the most important generals of World War II. He not only kept the war effort going on the front, but he kept the war effort going all over the world. He was FDR's right-hand man and probably the single most important person in the war. He'd later become Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. The Marshall Plan was his idea. The Marshall Plan was the idea to rebuild Europe because we failed to do so after World War I. The seeds for World War II were planted at World War I. Marshall understood that, did not want it to happen. There's a great quote underneath this picture. I can't read it from here, but I wanted you to know that. Churchill was rewarded by the British people by being voted out of office at the end of the war. but he is still the greatest statesman, and he was the first to talk about the Soviets and the Iron Curtain. So this is an excerpt from his Iron Curtain speech in Missouri, 1946. Truman was there as well. He was actually invited by Truman. The Russians always point to this speech as kind of that line in the sand, as to say, well, this is where the Cold War started. Well, the Cold War started right after World War II. As I said earlier, the Russians had spies working on the Manhattan Project. That's Klaus Fuchs on the right. And that center picture is the first Russian atomic bomb exploded in Kazakhstan. They would do about 400, 500 other tests in Kazakhstan and do a really good job of contaminating that part of the country. You can see the Arizona Daily Star headline, and that is their atomic bomb in the far left corner. So just 4 or 5 years after the war, they had their own bomb, thanks to Klaus Fuchs. And we had tried our first hydrogen bomb test at Alugalab Island on November 1st, 1952. You can look for the island, but you won't find it. It was vaporized. You might be able to find the crater under the ocean. The Russians would follow with their own hydrogen bomb as well in 1955. So we have to ask ourselves, did we ever really get out of the Cold War for very long? This is the Ukraine border. There's over 100,000 Soviet troops there. We don't know whether they're going to invade or not, but the people in the Ukraine are getting ready. And I mean, every single household is in a state of crisis right now. I'll end with what Plato said 2,500 years ago: only the dead have seen the end of war. Unfortunately. So if you have any questions, anybody? Yes, go ahead. I can't really see you because I'm blinded by the light.
We've got a question for you here from Kirk.
Okay.
And I'd ask those on Zoom, if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand or type it into the chat, please.
The director of the National Infantry Museum is a Rotary friend of my family, and he gave my family a tour not long ago. I don't think a lot of people know about that museum. Could you tell people about it down in Fort Benning, Georgia?
I'm sorry, can you say that?
The National Infantry Museum, which is a fabulous place to experience a lot of what you've been talking about. Have you been able to visit that museum?
I have not. I'm not aware of it, unfortunately.
Well, that's good that we got aware of it today. It's fairly new, and the Smithsonian people helped to put it together. And they highlight the significance of the infantry in some pretty exciting ways. And all the Medal of Honor winners in American history are highlighted as part of the museum.
And this is at Fort Benning.
Yes, where my hometown.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it's really worth visiting.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I just have a comment, and that is that my uncle served in that Third Army and had the luxury, as you say, of playing dead for 6 hours under the snow in the Battle of the Bulge, being kicked and having to be able to utter not a sound.
There were some 46 survivors or so at that massacre at Malmedy who did exactly that. They hid under the bodies of other men who were dead. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more casualties.
Mike, I have a question for you. You kind of implied there that the Cold War is maybe not really over, or maybe it's just hiatus. You know, things are not looking good in that part of the world. And one of the interesting things that I've recently kind of read about was just how the Russians reacted during the first part of the war, and then later on after they encountered the Nazis, essentially. And at first, the the Germans and the Italians were able to make a lot of progress, if you will, in not progress, but they were able to win a lot of battles. They pushed the Russians back, and then kind of the cruelty. What I've read is that the cruelty of the Germans was far greater than what the communist cruelty was, and so then they started pushing back. So it's kind of like at first, we don't want communists, come and take us. Wait, we don't want Nazis, so we're going to fight back. And so I guess my long-winded question is, do you think things are different now in that part of the world with how communism is viewed? Certainly, there's thoughts on China and Russia, although not communist per se. Some people would argue that there's still a lot of authoritarianism in that part of the world. So I guess my question to you is more how you think that plays out in that part of the world, kind of given that background of how the people have viewed that type of rule.
Okay. Let me digress a bit and go back to World War II, because you have some questions regarding the Soviets versus the Germans.
Yeah.
The Soviets were no better than the Germans, and in many respects, they were worse. We talked about the massacre at Malmedy. Massacres throughout the war were unfortunately very common. We have some dirt on our hands as well, but nothing remotely close to what the Germans or the Russians did. Of all the German prisoners taken by the Russians, less than 0.1% would ever see Germany again. They all perished in the hands of the Russians. And when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, they murdered everybody. There were simply no prisoners. That's the way it was. And with regards to one group being worse than another, I've talked to several people that survived the war who lived in Poland. And first, of course, they're conquered by the Germans. And then you have the Russians overrun Poland in the other direction. And some have told me that the Russians were even worse than the Germans. Hitler and Stalin were both psychotic, the most psychotic, murderous people imaginable. And whereas the Soviet Union claims that they lost 20 million people in World War II, it's more correct to say that over 10 million of those Russians were killed by Stalin in the purges before the war, from the 20s and the 30s, all the way from the revolution in 1917. At the start of World War II, Stalin's officer corps was nearly gone. He'd murdered nearly all of his generals, probably half of his colonels on down. So when war came, he was completely unprepared. And by the way, the Allies told Stalin that the Germans were massing and they were going to invade the Soviet Union. And he was so neurotic that he thought that the Allies were encouraging him to start a war with Germany. So again, you have two sick and very psychotic people. With regards to where the Soviet Union is today under Putin's leadership, remember where he came from. Remember, he's an ex-KGB guy, and remember, he would like very much to have his hands on the old Soviet Union. He wants to go that direction. I really believe that. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
To further this discussion about the Soviet Union and World War II, I remember seeing a documentary some years back talking about, just for some context, what the Soviets suffered during World War II. And whether it's 10 million or 20 million, it's a big number, regardless of who is responsible.
Absolutely.
And all of their manufacturing and defense capability was in the West. And as a people, they pulled up roots of everything just in front of the German lines, moved it all to Siberia, where the Germans couldn't get to them. And the siege of Leningrad was what, 2 years?
800, over 800 days.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
the Soviets suffered probably like no other country did in World War II, at the basic civilian level. So, when you see, Stalin was the biggest monster of the 20th century.
Yes.
But you see him taking over Eastern Europe, but clearly that was a buffer. They never wanted to be invaded like that again. So it's somewhat understandable. We can't say their actions were justified, but we've never on this country since, as you said, Gettysburg suffered anything even close to what the Soviets suffered in World War II.
We came out
Just
of
a
World War
comment.
II as the winners. We never, other than the Aleutian Islands, which was just a very small thing, we never really had warfare on our land. We didn't go through it. The Russian experience, which will be the next thing I talk about, is so incredible because somehow or another they survived through it all. There are two unwritten rules of warfare. And the first one is to never invade the Soviet Union. And the second one is to never invade China. You simply will not win a land battle against them. And I think the Russian culture, and it's in their DNA since World War II, is they simply will not be defeated. And you talked about the siege of Leningrad. When people are willing to eat their cats and dogs, the leather off their shoes, and scrape the wheat paste off their wall covering. And by the way, they had over 2,000 cases of cannibalism. Believe me, they will survive. They'll survive over anything you could possibly imagine. And that is the struggle. And that's one of the things I find so absolutely interesting about that. Because for us, in our education system, as Alan and I were talking about earlier, for us, most of us believe the war started at D-Day, and we're going all the way back. We're going all the way back to the 30s and through the 40s. We just simply weren't a part of it. We were left out. By war's end, the Brits were depleted. I mean, they couldn't have fought a war much longer. They just simply couldn't have. Yes, sir.
All right. I think we have time for one more short question now. All right.
Okay.
I just wanted to, we are so fortunate in this country to have some really amazing museums that help us understand history. And I just want to tell you about two real quickly. If you get on I-10 and go east, you're going to go through Fredericksburg, Texas, and stop and see the World War II Museum of the War in the Pacific. Stop before you move on, and then move on, and you'll get to New Orleans, where the U.S. World War II Museum is, National World War II Museum, yeah. One of the most phenomenal exhibits of any kind I've ever seen anywhere. And Sharon and I are charter members of that one. So if you're interested in putting it on your travel list, we'll help you get that to happen. And I also want to say that if you plan a trip to Europe, the first thing on your list needs to be Bastogne. The museum there, the monument there, where they still do daily flyovers that are divided up among the different nations of Western Europe. So one day the Belgians will do a flyover, and the next day the French, and the next day somebody else, the Dutch. And that's still going on out of respect and appreciation for the American effort in Western Europe in World War II. So those are three places we would sure encourage you to visit.
All right. Jimmy, thank you.
Mike, that was a great presentation. That was unfortunate. unfortunately not able to be here part one, but this is great part two. And that was a heck of a teaser. It sounds like part three is somewhere in the works. So hopefully we'll see you not too far into the future here. But I also wanted to say, just as a token of our appreciation, we're going to make another donation in your honor by having 100 more kids vaccinated against polio, which is Rotary International's kind of mission. So just as a way for us to say thank you for coming and joining us and giving us this great presentation. Thank you for coming. All right, so we're running short on time, but we have a growing pot in the Queen of Hearts world. So Bobby D, I think you have the honors today.
So we have 42 cards, and some late purchases brought the total up to $900. So today's ticket winner will perhaps win $450. And it will come as no surprise to you that the winner is Andy Kerr.
My goodness.
It is the Jack of Diamonds.
Jack of Diamonds. Oh, sorry, Andy.
There was a picture, but the wrong picture.
Sorry, Andy. Maybe next time.
Yeah, we'll keep trying.
At this point, I don't know what's more reliable: Putin's elections or Andy winning the Queen of Hearts. So hopefully, sorry, was that a little bit too serious? Sorry, my fault. Foot and mouth and all that. Well, right. So I think what I want to do, and since we're pressed a little bit for time, and it is the new year, so we want to keep it festive. Way to start the year, so I'll dispense with fines today, but I know that the bucket did go around. But I'll open it up to not Queen of Hearts, some happy bucks, and I'll get things started off. I'll chime in, and Al, I don't know, or Pat, if you wouldn't mind walking around for any happy bucks. I want to throw in a little bit to say thank you to Andy and Sharon. I was MIA towards the end of the year, and they very gallantly stepped in and did a lot of the heavy lifting for me. So just wanted to say thank you. And I also partly that is not being able to attend our festive party, but Mariana did a great job, I hear, on the mariachi group. So thank you all for attending. Sorry I was not able to make it, but there's always next year is kind of what I'm hoping for, is the motto. Although that was last year, so this is next year. Anyway, so any other happy bucks? Thank you, Steve, with the mic.
This is just a happy new year, and we had a great time with our family up in Oregon over the holidays, and that's certainly worth celebrating, as is the attendance today of my cousin Jeffrey from Portugal.
All right.
I only have a $5 bill, so that's in the pot. To celebrate Rotary, at my mother's funeral 2.5 weeks ago, the executive secretary of her club was in the church narthex giving out makeups to everybody that attended. They were afraid of my mother. And the other good news is the El Tour Ride to End Polio total was announced on Wednesday, a couple of $1,000 short of $3 million.
Wow. That's great.
So I got appointed to be the chair of the committee next year by somebody named Governor Anita, almost Governor Anita, but yeah. And as I give the microphone over to Steve, I'll mention briefly that Rotarians in Colorado are responding to the 991 homes that were burned. And a friend of mine, his brother was all part of that. And he's just so thankful for Rotary's response.
All right, Mariana.
We're starting the year very well with wonderful programs. Thank you, Mike. It's great to have you here. Al Chesser has done something fabulous for us, and I want to thank him. He has secured the new chief of police to come and talk to us. This is the very first Rotary Club in Tucson that has the privilege of having him. Please help me let everybody know about this. We want to have a very good attendance the 14th, next week.
Next week.
Right, yes. No, this week, this the 14th. Yes, the days go by very fast, Al, I know.
2022, Al.
So this is a very special request. Sharon and I were just talking about the possibility of contacting other Rotary clubs. If you have friends in other clubs that might be interested, I know that our club is interested in having him here. Let's show force and be here. Thank you.
All right, any other happy bucks? Anyone on Zoom would like to participate? All right. Well, I think that means our meeting's drawing to close. I just want to say just again, Mariana is totally right. A good point there. We want to show and force there. So I want to thank you all for attending in person. I know that there's a lot going on in the world today that kind of makes us a little bit nervous. So thank you for venturing out and joining us today. It's really great to see everyone. It's been over a month for me. So your reprieve is gone. I'm back. So kind of, 6 more months to go before our fearless leader, Andy, takes over. But with that, I want to say thank you again to Mike for joining us today. It was great to have you, and hopefully we look forward to having you again for part 3. I want to thank our hybrid team, Paul and Steve, for doing such a great job and jumping right on things for the eagle eye of Arturo, who he's gone suspiciously, maybe. I don't know.
Probably if you're going to do Zoom, one poll, probably so we know.
So for those on Zoom, so we are going to, and I think you might have done that already, but for future Zoom meetings, if you can, we're going to have a waiting room. And then if you want to just put in your entire name so that we know it's you, and then allow in the correct folks into our meetings to join us. So with that, I think we are all squared. Thank you again. It's great to see everyone, and hope to see you all next week. And if you wouldn't mind joining me rising and joining me on reciting the 4-way test of the things Rotarians think, say, and do. Should all know it by memory now. Man. There we go. All right. So first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.